The words hit me like a slap to the face. Stop being selfish. You're so old, you won't even have time to enjoy the money from the sale. My son, David, stood in my kitchen in his perfectly pressed designer suit, telling me I needed to sell my beloved country house so his new wife could buy a sports car. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. But let me rewind and explain how I ended up here. My name is Margaret Sullivan, I'm 72 years old, and apparently, according to my only child, I'm too ancient to deserve nice things. That country house isn't just another piece of property, it's the lake house my late husband, Robert, built with his own hands 40 years ago. David grew up there. He learned how to fish off that dock. He even brought his first girlfriend there to impress her. That first girlfriend, by the way, was not the 29-year-old Brittany currently clinging to his arm like a piece of expensive jewelry. Mom, you don't even use the place anymore, David continued, his voice dripping with that patronizing tone he'd mastered since marrying his second wife 8 months ago. It's just sitting there collecting dust, and Brittany and I could really use the cash. I looked at Brittany, perched on my kitchen stool like a blonde vulture. She wore that exact expression people get when they're mentally spending money that doesn't belong to them. Her Instagram perfect nails tapped impatiently against her phone case. The house is worth at least $400,000, she added helpfully. That's enough for the Porsche and maybe a little vacation to celebrate. I nearly choked on my coffee. A little vacation to celebrate selling the home where my husband and I planned to grow old together, the place where his fishing rods still hung in the shed, and the wind chimes he'd put up still sang on the porch. I'm not selling, I said quietly. David's face hardened. Don't be ridiculous. What do you need a house that big for? You live here now. He waved his hand around my modest 2-bedroom apartment, as if he were pointing out a prison cell. Because it's mine, I replied. Technically, Brittany said, inspecting her manicure, you won't need much longer anyway. I mean, at your age, the sentence hung in the air, like poison gas. At my age. What? At my age, I should quietly disappear and stop inconveniencing young people by continuing to exist. David shot her a warning look, but he didn't correct her. He didn't disagree either. His silence said everything. No, I said again, standing up, my knees protesting slightly. The house stays in the family. We are family, David snapped, and we need that money now, not after you're gone. There it was, the truth finally crawling out into the open. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding their inheritance early plus interest. After they left, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, listening to the emptiness. David's parting words echoed in my head. Think about it, Mom. Do the right thing for once. The right thing, as if holding on to the home where I'd buried my husband's ashes in the garden was somehow wrong. That was the moment I decided to do something that would change everything. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Sarah Mitchell answered on the third ring. Mrs. Sullivan. Her voice carried that careful politeness people reserve for ex-mothers-in-law. Is everything okay? I'd always liked Sarah. She was smart, successful, and had treated me with real respect during her 10-year marriage to David. She was also the reason I knew exactly what kind of man my son had become. I'm fine, dear, I said. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this week. I have a proposition that might interest you. There was a pause. Sarah was a family law attorney. She could hear when something serious was coming. Of course, she said. How about tomorrow morning? That little cafe on Maple Street. Perfect. I needed someone I could trust. And Sarah had proven who she was when she walked away from David's cheating with her dignity intact, unlike Brittany, who'd been the other woman before becoming the current wife. The next morning, I arrived early and chose a corner table where we could speak privately. Sarah walked in looking polished and professional, dark hair pulled back, her suit flawless. She'd always dressed like someone who took herself seriously. You look well, she said, sitting across from me with her latte. I heard about David's situation. By situation, she meant his third attempt at starting a business with other people's money. This time, it was a cryptocurrency venture that collapsed faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice. How would you feel about owning a lake house? Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly. I'm listening. I told her everything. David's demands, Brittany's cold calculations, the casual cruelty of suggesting I didn't have enough time left to enjoy my own property. With every word, Sarah's expression darkened. So, she said when I finished, He wants you to sell the house where you scattered Robert's ashes. It wasn't a question, so his new wife can buy a sports car. Sarah stared into her coffee for a long moment. When she finally looked up, there was something cold and focused in her eyes, something that reminded me why she had never lost a case. What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Sullivan? I'm proposing to sell you the house, quietly, privately, for exactly what it's worth, and David doesn't know you're even considering this. I smiled for the first time in days. David doesn't know a lot of things, I continued, like the fact that I've been documenting every conversation we've had about money since he married that girl, or that I've been quietly transferring assets to protect them from his creditors. Sarah leaned back in her chair, and I could practically see the legal wheels turning in her mind. This isn't about the money for you, is it? Not at all, I said. This is about teaching my son that some things aren't for sale and that treating your mother like a walking ATM has consequences. When would you want to do this? Soon, before he gets more aggressive. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and slid it across the table. I had the house appraised recently. Fair market value is $420,000. Sarah opened the folder and scanned the documents with professional efficiency. These are legitimate, she said. You've really thought this through. I've had plenty of time, I replied. 20 years of being a widow gives you a very clear sense of what actually matters. She closed the folder and met my eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, I have to ask, are you doing this to hurt David, or to protect yourself? It was a fair question. Sarah had seen how David operated. She knew how charming and manipulative he could be in equal measure. She also knew how many times I'd enabled him, bailing him out of one financial disaster after another. Both, I said honestly, but mostly, I'm doing it because that house deserves to belong to someone who will love it. Sarah sat quietly for several minutes, absorbing everything. Finally, she nodded. I'll buy it, she said, but I have one condition. What's that? You get to keep using it whenever you want. It's still your home, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm just protecting it for you. That was the moment I knew I'd chosen the right person. Planning the sale felt like preparing for a military operation. Sarah and I met 3 more times over the next week, working through every detail with the precision of seasoned generals. We need to keep this completely confidential, Sarah said during our second meeting. I'll use my maiden name on all the paperwork, Sarah Chen. David knows I kept my professional name, but he doesn't know I legally changed back to my birth name after the divorce. Smart. David had always been careless about details when it suited him, but he wasn't stupid. If he saw the name Sarah Mitchell on any document, even he would connect the dots. How long will the whole process take? I asked. With a cash purchase, no inspections needed, and both parties motivated, 2 weeks, maybe less. Sarah smiled grimly. I've been looking for a property exactly like this. Funny how the perfect house just fell into my lap. We scheduled the inspection for the following Monday. I would drive out to the lake house as usual for my weekly cleaning and maintenance visit. Sarah would meet me there as a potential buyer, and we'd go through the motions of a proper showing. What if David shows up unexpectedly? Sarah asked. He won't, I said. He hasn't been to the lake house in over a year. Says it's too far from the city. I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Too far from his precious Wi-Fi and delivery services. That weekend, I found myself standing in David's old bedroom, staring at the faded pencil marks on the wall where we used to measure his height. Every summer, he had loved this place once. We'd had our best conversations sitting on the dock at sunset, talking about his dreams and plans for the future. When had he turned into this stranger who measured everything by its resale value? My phone buzzed. A text from Brittany. Hey Mama M. Any thoughts on the house situation? David said you needed time to think, but we're super excited to start looking at cars. Mama M. As if we were friends when in truth, what were we? She was married to my son, but she'd never bothered to build a real relationship with me. I was just an obstacle to be smoothed over when necessary. I typed back, still thinking, these things take time. Her reply came instantly. Totally get it. Just remember, the market is super hot right now. Strike while the iron is high. Strike while the iron is high. She couldn't even get the expression right. Monday morning arrived. Gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that felt more like a funeral than a business transaction. I drove out to the lake house with my usual bag of cleaning supplies, playing the role of the devoted homeowner maintaining a property she was quietly preparing to sell. Sarah arrived exactly on time, looking every bit the successful attorney who could afford a $400,000 lake house. She'd even brought a clipboard and a measuring tape, just to make it feel real. "It's beautiful," she said as I walked her through the rooms Robert had crafted with his own hands. "These built-in bookshelves are incredible. My husband made those himself," I said. "He was a carpenter before he started his construction business." We moved through each room slowly. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about the electrical system, the septic tank, dock maintenance, everything a serious buyer would ask. Anyone watching would have seen exactly what we wanted them to see. A widow reluctantly considering selling the home she loved to a qualified buyer. "The garden is spectacular," Sarah said as we walked the property. "Those roses must be decades old." "Robert planted them for our 10th anniversary," I said, gently touching one of the pink blooms. "That's where I scattered his ashes 3 years ago." Sarah's expression softened. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you sure about this? Once we do it, there's no going back." I thought of David's words again. "Stop being selfish. You're so old you won't have time to enjoy the money anyway." "I'm sure," I said. "This house needs someone who will appreciate it." "Then let's make it official," Sarah said. "I'll have the papers ready by Wednesday." After she drove away, I sat alone on the dock, watching the water lap gently against the posts Robert had driven into the lake bed 40 years earlier. In less than a week, it would all belong to someone else. But, unlike David's plan, this someone else would protect what Robert and I had built together. My phone rang. David's name lit up the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Mom, have you thought any more about the house?" he asked. "Brittany found this amazing Porsche online, but the seller wants to move fast. I'm still considering my options." "What options?" he snapped. "It's a simple yes or no." That's where he was wrong. That wasn't simple at all. And by the time he understood that, it would be far too late. The closing took place on Wednesday morning in Sarah's law office. I told David I was heading to my book club, a lie that came surprisingly easily. After 47 years of marriage and 20 years of widowhood, I'd become quite skilled at protecting my privacy. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked as we sat in the conference room, waiting for the notary. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also more excited than I've been in years." The paperwork moved quickly when both parties wanted the same thing. Sarah had arranged a cashier's check for the full amount, along with enough extra to cover all closing costs. Everything was clean, legal, completely private. "The deed will be recorded with the county tomorrow," the notary explained as I signed my name for what felt like the 100th time. "The property will officially belong to Sarah Chen as of noon today." Sarah Chen. Seeing the name on official documents felt like a small but deeply satisfying victory. David had no idea his ex-wife had legally reclaimed her birth name after the divorce. He probably assumed she was still somewhere using his surname, quietly mourning their failed marriage. If only he knew she was sitting across from me, writing a check for the very house he'd tried to force me to sell to fund his wife's shopping spree. "Mrs. Sullivan," the notary said, "you'll need to remove any personal belongings you wish to keep before the end of the month." "Actually," Sarah interjected smoothly, "Mrs. Sullivan and I have a separate agreement regarding her personal effects. She's welcome to retrieve items whenever she likes." Another small kindness David would never have thought to offer. After the closing, Sarah and I sat in her office sharing coffee and something that felt surprisingly like friendship. "So," she asked, "what happens now?" "Now I go home and wait for David to discover what I've done." "How long do you think that will take?" I thought about it. David was self-absorbed, but not entirely stupid. Eventually, he'd grow impatient enough to drive out to the lake house himself, or he'd send Brittany to do his dirty work while he stayed safely in the city. "A week, maybe 2, I said. "He'll start with phone calls, then surprise visits when I don't give him the answer he wants." "And what will you tell him?" I smiled faintly. "The truth, that I sold the house." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Just like that," I said. "I won't tell him who bought it right away. Let him sit with the uncertainty for a while. He could use some of that in his life." We shook hands formally. Then Sarah surprised me. She stepped forward and hugged me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with this, and for wanting it for the right reasons." On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The check in my purse represented more than money. It meant freedom, the power to make decisions about my own life. David had treated me like a resource to be managed for so long that I'd nearly forgotten I was a person with rights, choices, and autonomy. That evening, I sat in my apartment flipping through old photo albums from the lake house. David as a little boy, beaming as he held up fish he'd caught off the dock. Robert teaching him how to use power tools in the garage we'd converted into a workshop. Family barbecues with David's high school friends, all of them treating the lake house like their personal summer camp. When had David's relationship with that place changed from love to calculation? When had it stopped being a home and become collateral? My phone buzzed with another text from Brittany. Mama M. Just wanted to let you know we found the perfect car. It's a 2023 Porsche Macan in this gorgeous coral color that totally matches my new handbag. Can't wait to celebrate your decision. She wanted to liquidate my husband's legacy so she could buy a car that matched her accessories. I typed back, decision made, we should talk soon. Her reply came instantly. Oh my God, yes. David is going to be so happy. Should we come over tonight? Let me call David tomorrow, I typed. This deserves a proper conversation. 3 heart emojis and a champagne glass popped up on my screen. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of the good wine I'd been saving. Tomorrow, I would call my son and tell him the house was sold. I would hear his excitement turn into confusion when he realized there would be no money for him, and eventually, when he was desperate enough to demand answers, I would tell him exactly who now owned the house where he'd learned to ride a bike. But tonight, I allowed myself to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of being the only person who knew just how perfectly everything had fallen into place. I waited until Thursday afternoon to call David. I wanted him to have a full day of anticipation, maybe even shopping for sports cars online with his wife. Let them taste the excitement before I served them reality. Mom, he said when he answered, his voice practically buzzing. Brittany said you made a decision about the house. I did. I sold it. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. You sold it. To who? He finally asked. A private buyer. Someone who understands what the property represents. Wait, he said, and I could hear him pacing, his footsteps echoing across hardwood floors. You sold it without talking to me, without even telling me you were considering offers. The indignation in his voice was almost laughable. This was the same man who demanded I sell the house to fund his wife's shopping spree. Yet somehow, he still believed he was entitled to control the process. You told me to sell it. David, I sold it, but we were supposed to discuss the details, the price, the timeline, what you'd do with the money. There it was, what I'd do with the money. He'd been so sure some of it would land in his pocket, just like every other time I'd liquidated something to rescue him from one of his financial messes. The price was fair market value. The timeline was immediate. The money is already in my account. Our account. Brittany's voice cut in from the background. It should be in our account. I heard David hiss at her to be quiet, but it was too late. The truth had slipped out. David, I said calmly, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This was my house to sell. The proceeds are mine to keep. But you never use that money, he snapped. You live like a miser. What's the point of having $400,000 sitting in savings when your family needs help? Your family needs help with a car payment. It's not just about the car, he said, his voice rising now, the control slipping. It's about building a life together. Brittany and I are trying to establish ourselves, and you're hoarding money that won't even do you any good. It's doing me plenty of good, I replied. I have financial security. For what? He shot back. You're 72. How much security do you really need? There it was, again that casual dismissal of my right to live comfortably for however much time I had left. In David's world, I was supposed to quietly hand over everything I owned to the younger generation, and then fade away without complaint. Need enough security to make sure I never have to depend on someone who talks to me the way you're talking to me right now. The line went silent. When David finally spoke again, his voice was lower, tightly controlled, edged with something that made my skin crawl. Who bought it, Mom? A private buyer. That's not an answer. Who specifically bought my father's house? A woman who will appreciate it. Give me a name. The command in his voice triggered something deep and instinctive in me. This wasn't a son asking a question. This was a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation, trying to bully his elderly mother into submission. No, he snapped. You heard me. No. The sale is final. The deed is recorded. And the identity of the new owner is none of your business. Like hell it isn't. That house has been in our family for 40 years. And now it isn't, I said calmly. You wanted it sold. David, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. I could hear him breathing hard, probably trying to calculate his next move. David had always been strategic. Even as a child, he was scrambling to regain control of a situation that had completely slipped from his grasp. "I'm coming over," he said at last. "I won't be here. Then I'll wait. I'm going out of town for a few days to visit your father's grave at the lake house." It was a liberté carefully constructed one. If David drove out to the lake house looking for me, he would discover that someone else was living there now, someone with every legal right to call the police if he refused to leave. "The new owner doesn't mind you visiting," I added. "She's very understanding about the emotional attachment to the property." After I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had just completely outmaneuvered my son, and the feeling was far more satisfying than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text. "This isn't over." I typed back, "Yes, it is." Then I called Sarah. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I hoped. He's angry, confused, and starting to panic. Think he'll try to find out who bought it." "Oh, absolutely," I said, "but good luck to him. Sarah Chen doesn't exist in his world. And if he drives out to the house," I smiled, "then he's in for quite a surprise." 3 days later, my phone exploded with calls. David, Brittany, David again, text after text, each more frantic than the last. The final attempt was a video call from Brittany. Against my better judgment, I answered. Margaret, she was sitting in her car, makeup smeared, nothing like the polished gold digger who had insulted me in my own kitchen. "You have to tell us who bought the house." "Why?" "Because David drove out there yesterday, and there was someone living there, like actually living there. Furniture, everything. It was even better than I'd imagined." "I told you," I said evenly. "I sold it to a private buyer." "But they wouldn't tell David who they were," she said, nearly hysterical. "They said they were house-sitting for the new owner, and that he was trespassing." I had to bite back a smile. Sarah had moved quickly, maybe even hired someone to stay there temporarily while she arranged her move. Smart woman. "If the new occupants told David he was trespassing," I said, "then he should probably stay away." "But it's his father's house," Brittany shrieked. "He has rights." "Actually," I replied, "he doesn't. Not anymore." "This is so unfair," she cried. "You can't just sell someone's childhood home without telling them." "I can sell my own property to whoever I want, whenever I want, for whatever reasons I choose," I said calmly. "That's what ownership means." Her face collapsed. "But what about our car?" And there it was. The real tragedy wasn't the loss of the house, it was the loss of what she thought was her money. "You'll have to find another way to pay for your Porsche. We can't afford it without the house." "Money," she said desperately. "David's business isn't doing well, and my boutique isn't making enough yet. We were counting on that money." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered her sitting in my kitchen, calculating the value of my grief, like she was appraising jewelry. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before demanding I sell my home." After I ended the call, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction, not happiness, exactly, but the deep, steady contentment that comes from perfect justice. My phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah. Double quotes, "Mrs. Sullivan. I think you should know David showed up at the house yesterday." "Brittany mentioned that," I said. "I hope you weren't there." "I wasn't, but my friend Marcus was. I asked him to house sit while I arranged the move, and he handled David beautifully. He told him he was house-sitting for the new owner, and that he needed to leave the property immediately." "How did David take that?" "According to Marcus, he got very aggressive, started demanding to know who the new owner was, insisting he had legal rights to the property. Marcus warned him he'd call the police." "Did David leave?" "Eventually, but he sat in his car at the end of the driveway for over an hour, just staring at the house." A chill ran through me. David angry was one thing. David obsessive was something else entirely. "Sarah," I said carefully, "you should know, David can be very persistent when he doesn't get his way." "I can handle persistent," she replied calmly. "I dealt with him for 10 years, remember, and legally, I'm completely protected. The deed is in my name. All the paperwork is filed with the county. I have every right to deny him access." "Even so," I said, "please be careful. He's more desperate than I've ever seen him." There was a brief pause. "Mrs. Sullivan, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you having any second thoughts? Any regrets about how this turned out?" I thought about it carefully. Had I been too harsh, too calculated in my response to my own son? Then, David's words echoed in my mind. Stop being selfish. You're so old you won't have time to enjoy the money anyway. No regrets, I said firmly. The house is in better hands now. Good, Sarah replied, because I'm moving in this weekend, and I plan to invite you for dinner soon, as our first official guest. After we hung up, I realized something had shifted. For the first time since Robert died, I wasn't dreading the future. I wasn't bracing for the next financial emergency, the next demand, the next cruelty disguised as family obligation. I was free, and David was about to learn just how expensive his greed had been. My phone buzzed with one last message from him. I'm going to find out who bought that house, and when I do, I'm going to make them very sorry they got involved in our family business. I smiled as I typed back, good luck with that. Still, I made a mental note to warn Sarah. David had no idea who he was, threatening, but Sarah Chun knew exactly who she was dealing with, and David Sullivan was finally about to get an education in consequences that was 20 years overdue. It took David exactly 4 days to figure out who Sarah Chen really was. I was having coffee on Tuesday morning when my phone rang with a call loud enough to wake the dead Sarah. He screamed, "You sold my father's house to my ex." I held the phone away from my ear and waited for the shouting to burn itself out. When David got like this, he usually exhausted himself after the first explosion. Years of managing his tantrums had taught me patience. Good morning to you too, David. Don't you dare good morning me. How could you do this? How could you sell it to that vindictive witch? Vindictive witch, that was rich coming from a man who'd demanded I sell my home so he could buy his current wife a sports car. Sarah made a fair offer at fair market value, I said calmly. The transaction was completely legitimate. She only bought it to spite me. This is some sick revenge plot you two cooked up together. In truth, it had been entirely my idea, but I wasn't about to correct him. Let him believe his ex-wife was just as calculating as he was. Sarah Chen is a successful attorney who wanted a lake house. I said, I had one to sell. It was simple business. Her name isn't Chen, he snapped. Her name is Mitchell. She's still my wife. I almost laughed. David, you divorced Sarah 3 years ago. She legally changed her name back to Chen 18 months ago. She is not your wife, and she hasn't been for a very long time. The silence that followed was profound. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he processed it. David had always assumed Sarah was still somewhere mourning their marriage, too broken to move on with her life. He was wrong. The reality that she hadn't just moved on, but had legally erased his surname from her identity, clearly shattered his ego. She can't live there, David said finally, his voice lower now, colder, more dangerous. I won't allow it. You don't have a choice in the matter, I replied. It's her property now. We'll see about that. I'm calling my lawyer. Good luck, I said. Sarah is a lawyer, and she specializes in family law. She knows exactly what rights you do and don't have when it comes to property that belongs to someone else. After he hung up, I called Sarah immediately. He knows, I said without any preamble. I assumed he would, eventually, she replied. Marcus said he saw David parked at the end of the driveway again yesterday, just sitting there, watching the house. Sarah, he threatened to call his lawyer. He also said he won't allow you to live there. Let him call whoever he wants, she said calmly. I have the deed, title insurance, and 10 years of experience dealing with David's empty threats. His lawyer will tell him exactly what I'm telling you. He has no legal standing whatsoever. What about the emotional harassment, the stalking? If he keeps showing up uninvited, I'll file for a restraining order, Sarah said. David always backs down when real legal consequences are on the table. I wanted to believe her, but something in David's voice had unsettled me. This wasn't just anger anymore, it was humiliation. And humiliated men often did foolish, reckless things. That afternoon, Brittany called. Margaret, you have to fix this. Her voice was tight with barely contained panic. David is talking about hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on Sarah. He wants to prove the sale was illegal somehow. The sale was completely legal. I know, she said, but he's spending money we don't have. He already paid a lawyer $2,000 just for a consultation. We can't afford this. There. It was. David's obsession with the house was now costing them the money they'd planned to spend on luxury purchases. Perhaps you should talk to your husband about accepting reality, I said, He won't listen. He just keeps saying his father's house belongs in the family and that Sarah stole it from him. Sarah didn't steal anything, I replied. She bought it. But you knew she was his ex-wife, Brittany snapped. You did this on purpose. I smiled. I did exactly what David asked me to do. I sold the house. I sold it to the one person guaranteed to make him miserable and to the one person who would truly appreciate it. If that makes David miserable, perhaps he should examine his own behavior. Brittany hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, I drove out to the lake house for the first time since the sale. I wanted to see how Sarah was settling in and, if I was honest, I was curious about David's reaction if he happened to see my car in the driveway. Sarah answered the door wearing jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt, looking younger and happier than I'd seen her in years. Mrs. Sullivan, perfect timing. I'm just finishing the living room. She'd painted the walls a warm cream that made the space feel brighter and larger. Robert's built-in bookshelves now held Sarah's law books mixed with novels and family photos. It looked like a home again, one where someone actually lived, not a shrine to the past. It's beautiful, I said, meaning it. It feels alive again. Come see the kitchen, she said. I finally got the coffee maker working properly. As we sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching the sunset spill across the lake, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. The house felt happy again. Any word from David today? Sarah asked. He called this morning. He's not taking the news well. I saw him drive by twice yesterday, she said. Slow enough that I could see him staring at the house, but not quite slow enough to count as harassment. Are you worried? Sarah thought for a moment. About David? Not really. He's always been more bark than bite. But I am worried about what this obsession is costing him financially and emotionally. That was Sarah. Even after everything David had put her through, she still worried about his well-being. It reminded me why I'd always liked her. David is a grown man, I said. He makes his own choices. You're not responsible for his reactions. I know, she replied, but I also know him well enough to recognize when he's spiraling. As if summoned by our conversation, a car pulled into the driveway. David's black BMW came in too fast and stopped far too close to the house. Sarah and I exchanged a look. Here we go, she said, calmly. David stormed up to the front door like he still lived there, his face flushed with rage, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd spent the entire day in frantic motion. Before he could even knock, Sarah opened the door. Hello, David. Don't you hello, David, me? He snapped. I want to know exactly how you manipulated my mother into this scheme. He shoved past her into the living room, his eyes darting around, taking in the changes she'd made. Each one seemed to unsettle him more. When he spotted me sitting calmly at the kitchen table, his anger sharpened into pure fury. I should have known, he said. You two planned this whole thing together. I stayed where I was, my voice steady. Actually, it was entirely my idea. Sarah's been plotting this since our divorce, he shot back. She couldn't stand that I moved on and found happiness. Sarah shut the front door and leaned against it, folding her arms. David, you've been served with trespassing papers. You need to leave. Trespassing, he scoffed. This is my father's house. This is my house. I own it, Sarah replied evenly. Legally and completely. You have no rights here. David let out a bitter, ugly laugh. Rights? You want to talk about rights? I have a right to know how you convinced my mother to betray her own family. I didn't betray anyone, I said, finally standing. I made a business decision about my property, your property that was supposed to be my inheritance. There it was, the truth he'd been circling for weeks. David had never seen the lake house as my home. He'd seen it as his future asset, something he believed he was entitled to simply because he existed. David, Sarah said quietly, your mother doesn't owe you an inheritance. She doesn't owe you anything. Stay out of this, Sarah. This is family business. It became my business when your mother chose to sell me her house. David turned back to me, his face twisted with betrayal. How could you do this to me, after everything I've done for you? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Everything you've done for me, I said. David, what exactly have you done for me? I call you, I visit you, I include you in family events. You call when you need money, I said. You visit when you want something, and you include me in family gatherings where your wife insults me and you don't defend me. That's not true. isn't it? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you took me to dinner without asking for a loan? When was the last time you treated me like your mother instead of your personal bank? David opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew he didn't have an answer. The house was supposed to stay in the family, he said at last. It did stay in the family, I replied. It stayed with someone who actually appreciates what your father built here. She's not family. She's my ex-wife. She's more family to me than you've been lately. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back, his face draining of color. You don't mean that? I mean every word, I said. Sarah treats me with respect. She listens when I talk. She doesn't see me as an ATM that occasionally needs maintenance. His eyes filled with tears, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt. Then his face hardened again. This isn't over, he said, turning to Sarah. I don't know what kind of dirt you have on my mother, but I'm going to find it. There is no dirt, David, she replied, just a woman who got tired of being taken for granted. After he left, Sarah and I sat as darkness settled in, listening to the crickets and the gentle splash of water against the dock. How do you feel? She asked. Lighter, I said, surprised by how true it felt. For the first time in years, I'm completely honest with myself about my relationship with my son. Think he'll give up now? I watched the red glow of David's taillights disappear down the lake road. No, this is just the beginning. I was right. David's campaign to reclaim the lake house became his full-time obsession. Over the next 2 weeks, he called me daily, sent increasingly desperate text messages, and even showed up at my apartment building twice. Mom, please, he said during what I decided would be our final conversation about it. Sarah doesn't even need that house. She has plenty of money. That's different. The lake house represents my childhood, he continued. My memories with Dad. It's part of who I am. Then you should have thought of that before you demanded I sell it so you could buy Brittany a car. That was different, he said quickly. I didn't think you'd actually sell it. The honesty of that statement was staggering. David had pressured me into selling the house while fully expecting me to refuse. He wanted to be able to tell Brittany he'd tried, while counting on my emotional attachment to keep his inheritance intact. David, I said slowly, I'm going to say this one more time. And after this, I don't want to discuss it again, I said. The house is sold. Sarah owns it legally and completely. You need to accept that and move on. I can't move on, David said. Every night I drive by and see her living in Dad's house, sleeping in his bedroom, using his workshop. It's wrong, Mom. It's fundamentally wrong. A chill ran down my spine. You drive by there every night. I need to see it, to make sure she's not destroying anything important. David, that's stalking. Sarah could have you arrested. She won't call the police. She knows this whole situation is messed up. I wasn't so sure. Sarah had been remarkably patient, but even her patience had limits. That afternoon, I called Sarah to warn her about David's nightly surveillance. I know, she said calmly. I've been documenting everything. Documenting times, dates, how long he stays. My security camera catches his car every night between 9 and 10. Aren't you frightened? More annoyed than frightened. David has always been dramatic and self-pitying, but he's not actually dangerous. Still, I'm keeping records in case I need them. What kind of records? Photos of his car, video footage, a written log of his behavior. If this escalates, I want to be prepared. 3 days later, it escalated. I was having lunch when Sarah called, her voice tight with controlled anger. Double quotes, Mrs. Sullivan. I need to tell you what David did last night. My stomach dropped. What happened? He didn't just drive by. He got out of his car, walked around the property, and looked in the windows. When I turned on the porch light, he tried the front door handle. Oh my God, did you call the police? I called them this morning. They're treating it as criminal trespassing. I have clear video of him trying to enter the house. What did they say? They're going to speak to David. If he comes back again, they'll arrest him. I felt sick. My son, the boy who used to build blanket forts in that living room, was now prowling around the windows like a criminal. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd go this far. It's not your fault. David is responsible for his own choices. What can I do? Nothing right now, but I wanted you to know I'm considering filing for a restraining order if the police warning doesn't work. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, crushed by the weight of what I'd set in motion. I'd wanted to teach David about consequences. I hadn't expected him to completely unravel. My phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. David got arrested. This is all your fault. Fix this now. Arrested, not just questioned, arrested. I called the police station and learned David had been picked up for violating a restraining order Sarah had filed that morning. The warning hadn't stopped him. He'd gone back anyway. When I called Sarah, she sounded exhausted. He came again last night, she said. 3 hours after the police spoke to him, he was in my garden, looking through the bedroom window. I didn't have a choice. Is he in jail? He's being processed. Brittany bailed him out this afternoon. Sarah, I said, if you decide this isn't worth the harassment, I'll understand. I could buy the house back from you. With all due respect, Mrs. Sullivan, that would be the worst possible outcome, she said gently. If David gets the house back through intimidation and stalking, he learns that this behavior works. He'll never stop pushing boundaries. She was right. Knowing that didn't make watching my son self-destruct any easier. And besides, she added, I love this house. I'm not letting David's obsession drive me out of the best home I've ever had. That evening, David called me from his car. His voice was raw, cracked with desperation. Mom, you have to help me. Sarah got me arrested. I could lose my license to practice law. You got yourself arrested, David. Sarah protected her property. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wanted to see the house. I looked through her bedroom window. It's not her bedroom, he said quickly. It's Dad's bedroom. Dad is dead, David, I said quietly. It's Sarah's bedroom now. Something broke in him. He started crying deep, ragged sobs that tore at my heart, despite everything. I don't know how to let go, he whispered. Then you need to learn. The intervention came from an unexpected source. Brittany. She showed up at my apartment at 8 in the morning, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her perfect makeup was smeared. Her designer clothes were wrinkled. Her hands were shaking. Margaret, she said, I need your help. David is scaring me. I let her in, noticing how thin she'd become. The stress of David's obsession was clearly destroying both of them. What's he doing now? I asked. He sits in his car outside the house every night, Brittany said. Even though he knows he could go to jail again. He has binoculars now. He takes pictures. My chest tightened. He's covered our bedroom wall with photos of Sarah and the house, she continued, all connected with red string like some insane conspiracy board. I felt cold all over. This wasn't just grief or anger anymore. This was a breakdown. He talks to the pictures, Brittany said, her voice cracking. He has conversations with images of your husband. He apologizes to the house for letting Sarah live there. Have you talked to anyone? I asked the doctor, a therapist. He won't go. He says everyone else is crazy, that he's the only one who understands what's really happening. She looked at me with desperate eyes. Margaret, I think he's having some kind of nervous breakdown. I made coffee while Brittany told me how bad things really were. David had stopped going to work. He'd maxed out their credit cards, hiring a private investigator to find proof the house sale was fraudulent. He'd called every lawyer in the city, trying to find someone willing to take his case. The worst part, Brittany said quietly, is that he's convinced Sarah brainwashed you. That stopped me cold. He thinks what? He's talking about having you declared mentally incompetent, she said. He thinks if he can prove you weren't of sound mind when you sold the house, he can reverse the sale. The coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. David was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal back the house I had legally sold. Brittany, I said, you need to get David professional help immediately. I tried. I scheduled a psychiatrist appointment. He refused. He said I was part of the conspiracy. What conspiracy? In his mind, you, me, Sarah, the police, his lawyer, we're all working together to steal his father's house. I felt like I was drowning. What I'd intended as a lesson about consequences had triggered a complete psychological collapse. David wasn't just angry anymore. He was delusional. Margaret, Brittany said softly, I'm leaving him. My heart dropped. Leaving? I can't live like this anymore, she said. But I'm scared of what he'll do when he realizes I'm gone. Where will you go? My sister's in Phoenix. I wanted to warn you first. When David figures out I've left, he's going to blame you and Sarah for destroying his marriage too. After Brittany left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by broken pieces of the coffee cup, wondering how my quiet act of justice had turned into a nightmare. I called Sarah to warn her about David's mental state and his plan to have me declared incompetent. Oh, Mrs. Sullivan, she said gently, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was this far gone. Neither did I said. Sarah, maybe I should buy the house back. This has gotten completely out of hand. No, she said firmly. Absolutely not. If we give in now, we validate his belief that harassment and stalking work. But he's talking about having me declared mentally incompetent. Let him try. I'll represent you myself if I have to. Any competent doctor will see you're perfectly capable of making your own decisions. What about your safety? I asked. What about his? I've upgraded my security system and filed a detailed report with the police. If he comes near my property again, he'll be arrested immediately, and Brittany's leaving him. Good for her, Sarah said. That takes courage. That evening, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. David called over and over, leaving increasingly incoherent voicemails about his rights, his father's house, and the conspiracy against him. Eventually, I turned off my phone and sat in the dark, wondering if justice was supposed to feel this terrible dot at midnight. Sarah called my landline. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry to wake you, but David just tried to break into the house. The police have him in custody again. My heart stopped. What happened? When they arrested him, she said, he had a crowbar and a can of gasoline. My blood turned to ice. Gasoline. The police believe he was planning to burn the house down. David hadn't just lost his mind, he'd become dangerous, and somehow I was going to have to find a way to save him from himself. The call came at 6 in the morning. David was in the county psychiatric hospital on a 72-hour hold after being arrested for attempted arson. According to the police report, he told officers that burning the house was the only way to free his father's spirit from Sarah's influence. I drove to the hospital in a daze, trying to reconcile the man in the psychiatric ward with the little boy who used to bring me dandelion bouquets. David looked terrible, unshaven, wearing hospital scrubs that hung loosely on his frame. When he saw me through the reinforced glass of the visitor room, his face crumpled. Mom, he whispered, they don't understand. I was trying to save the house, not destroy it. I picked up the phone that connected us. David, you were carrying gasoline and a crowbar. I was going to burn down just the parts Sarah changed, he said, his voice small but steady. The paint, the new furniture, I wanted to restore it to how Dad left it. The terrifying part was how sincere he sounded. In his mind, this was a reasonable plan. Sweetheart, I said gently, Dad didn't leave the house to be a museum. He built it to be a home, for people to live and be happy. But Sarah doesn't belong there. She's erasing everything Dad built. She's living there, David. She's taking care of it. That's what your father would have wanted. For a long moment, David stared at me through the glass. Then, slowly, clarity returned to his eyes. I think I've been sick, Mom. Really sick. I think so too, I said. But you can get better. Do you hate me for everything I've done? The question broke my heart. I don't hate you, David. I'm disappointed in some of your choices. But I will always love you, even after I tried to have you declared incompetent. Even after that, I'm going to lose everything, aren't I? My law license, my marriage, maybe even my freedom. I wanted to lie, to comfort him, but he needed truth more than comfort now, probably. But you can rebuild. It won't be easy, but you can start over. Over the next 3 weeks, David was diagnosed with a stress-induced psychotic episode, triggered by grief he'd never properly processed after Dad's death. The psychiatrist explained that my sale of the house had forced him to confront reality in a way he'd been avoiding for years. Botany filed for divorce while David was still in the hospital. She also pressed charges for financial fraud. He had forged her signature on several loans during his obsession with reclaiming the house. Sarah dropped her restraining order and declined to press charges for the attempted arson. But the state prosecutor moved forward anyway. David would face probation and mandatory therapy, but no jail time. His law license was suspended pending a psychological evaluation. When David was released from the hospital, he had nowhere to go. Brittany had moved to Phoenix. Their apartment cleared out. His assets were frozen due to the fraud charges. I found him a small efficiency apartment near the hospital and helped him apply for temporary assistance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Why are you helping me? He asked as we moved his few remaining possessions into the cramped space. After everything I put you through, because you're my son, because everyone deserves a chance to heal. You ruined a lot, yes, but you can learn from it. 6 months later, David was working as a paralegal at a legal aid clinic, barely making enough to cover rent and therapy bills. He was taking medication for depression and anxiety, attending weekly counseling sessions, and slowly rebuilding his life. We had lunch together once a month, his idea, not mine. He was different, not quieter, more thoughtful, genuinely interested in my life instead of just my assets. I need to apologize to Sarah, he said during one lunch. I know she probably doesn't want to see me, but I need to try. I think she'd appreciate that. Will you ask if she'd meet me? That evening, I called Sarah. She agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in town, with me present as a neutral party. David had written a letter, which he read aloud in halting, emotional sentences. He apologized for the stalking, the harassment, the attempted break. He acknowledged that his behavior had been inexcusable and potentially dangerous. I don't expect forgiveness, he concluded. I just wanted you to know I understand how wrong I was, and I'm getting help to make sure I never behave like that again. Sarah listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for the apology. David, I can see you're working hard to get better. Is there anything I can do to make amends? Take care of yourself. Stay in therapy. Build a life you can be proud of. After David left, Sarah and I sat finishing our coffee. How do you think he's really doing? She asked. Different, I said. It's like the person he was supposed to be finally has room to exist. And how are you doing with all this? I considered the question. The past year had been a roller coaster. Anger, satisfaction, guilt, worry, and finally, something approaching peace. I'm proud of how it turned out, I admitted. Not the breakdown, not the arrest, but the ending. David is getting help. I have a home I love, and I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. Any regrets? Just one. I wish I'd stood up for myself years earlier. Maybe if I had, David would never have gotten so entitled and desperate. Or maybe this was the wake-up call he needed to deal with his grief and grow up. 6 months after that conversation, Sarah sent me a photo. She was standing in the garden at the lake house, next to a small wooden bench she'd built near the spot where I'd scattered Robert's ashes. The plaque on the bench read, "In memory of Robert Sullivan, who built this home with love." I called her immediately. It's beautiful, thank you. I thought you should have a place to sit when you visit him. You know, I think Robert would approve of how this all turned out, even the dramatic parts. I laughed, especially the dramatic parts. He always said life was too short for boring stories, and if I'd learned anything from this whole experience, it was that my story was far from over. At 73, I was just getting started. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.